it depends on the art. And so a good example would be that we understand ballet to be the highest form of art, let's say, highest form of dancing. But actually the highest form of dancing is something like square dancing or folk dancing. That is, that it's dancing that you dance in. You don't watch dancing, you participate in dancing. And so the highest form of music isn't sitting in a concert hall and watching a concert. The highest form of music is being in a church and singing to the glory of God all together and participating in the liturgical movement.
I had the great pleasure earlier of speaking with Jonathan Pageau of the Symbolic World. He's an icon carver, artist, speaker, writer, and he joined me to discuss masculinity and femininity, art, modesty, and worship. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to meet you.
It's good to meet you. I first came to know of you and your work. It was around about 2018, I think. And I was at a Catholic conference and someone there said, you know, obviously we're focused on JC, Jesus Christ, but it's also a great time for JPs. And she mentioned the Saint Pope John Paul II's letter to artists. We were looking at that and exploring that. And then she said, and of course, Jordan Peterson. And I was familiar with him because I'd been following some of his work. And then she mentioned a new name to me, and it was Jonathan Pageau. And she said, so we've got JP2, we've got Jordan Peterson, and we've got JP Jonathan Pageau. So that's how I came to know about you. And then I went and immediately looked up what you do and have been glued ever since. It's fantastic.
Well, thanks. It is funny that we all have the same initial. There are a few other people too that have the JP that are kind of in our circle. So it is kind of funny.
There you go. Have you read JP2's letter to artists? Are you familiar with it?
I think I read it a very long time ago when I was an artist, you know, like 20 years ago. So I don't remember much of it. Yeah,
there's a lovely, I'll just quote you a little bit if I can. There's a lovely couple of lines in here. So he says, obedient to their inspiration in creating works, both worthwhile and beautiful, artists not only enrich the cultural heritage of each nation and of all humanity, but they also render an exceptional social service in favor of the common good. And every genuine artistic intuition goes beyond what the senses perceive, and reaching beneath reality's surface, strives to interpret its hidden mystery. To interpret its hidden mystery, I think that's beautiful. And do you think we've lost that? I feel like we've lost that in artistic ventures now. It's not so much about unlocking what's given, but a kind of self-expression. Do you find that in art?
I think in general, there's been a fetishization of art in general. So one of the things I like to do is to go further back in terms of the question of art, which is, I think something went wrong or something started going off in the end of the Middle Ages, where we started to understand art as this pure expression, as this expression of something. And so we have paintings, we have opera, we have concert music, which develops. And all of these are seen to us as high art, but in a way they're already one step removed. There's something alienating about the very forms, which is that they are purely passive, right? They're objects that exist to be contemplated and thought about. Whereas the ancient arts or the traditional arts were participative. They participated in the culture, or the culture in the strictest sense of what it is that binds us together, right? The cult, like what do we celebrate together? So, you know, a portrait would be of an important person, you know, in order for us to remember them or in order to celebrate them. And the same images would be in churches or in important buildings, then it would be to celebrate and to participate in our lives. So I think that that's the first problem that happened. And then what that leads to, the fetishization leads ultimately to what we have now. But so at first it looks like very sublime works that are extremely lofty, you know, and although they aren't participating in our culture, there's something about them which is very sublime, but ultimately reaching that high ends up with something like entertainment in the end. It turns into something pretty pernicious, actually. And so you can already see it in something like Beethoven. You already see it maybe even before that, where there's this kind of twisting, this desire to create idiosyncrasy and to to play with aesthetic forms in order to create sensations and to create even, you know, kind of abstract impressions. And so that's what I think that's what led us today. And I think the artists, even if 200 years ago, if you had told them that we would reach a point where visual art would just be a banana, you know, glued to a, you know, taped to a wall, or that, you know, concerts would just be, you know, a bunch of random, almost random sounding noises next to each other, they probably would be surprised. But you can, in hindsight, you can see how all of it led to the moment we're in now. And I think the key for artists is to recapture participation at the outset. And so it's not like there's anything wrong with entertainment or with more theatrical performances or opera and all that, but it has to be anchored in participation in order for it to keep its value. What I mean by participation is it depends on the art. And so a good example would be that we understand ballet to be the highest form of art, let's say, highest form of dancing. But actually the highest form of dancing is something like square dancing or folk dancing. That is, that it's dancing that you dance in. You don't watch dancing, you participate in dancing. And so the highest form of music isn't sitting in a concert hall and watching a concert. The highest form of music is being in a church and singing to the glory of God all together and participating in the liturgical movement, right? So the highest form of painting isn't some big expensive piece that you go see in a museum, but it's a piece of visual memory that is in your church or in your state building that remembers, that makes you participate in a memory of your people, a memory of a religious memory. So that's what I mean by participation. And so you can look at all the different arts and you can notice what that looks like. And today, what's interesting, for example, the most participative art, and actually what I think is the most important art, which is architecture, is they're pushing hard. It's so difficult to make it non-participative because you actually live in these buildings, right? It actually defines the space in which you exist. It's like, it's so fundamental to your perception of reality that it actually tends to fall into the background of your being. But, you know, architects like Frank Gehry and a lot of the crazy contemporary architects are doing everything they can to make architecture look like it's falling down, look like it's chaotic, look like it's not actually a space for a home. And so we can see how far it's gone, but that's what I mean by participation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why do you think they're doing that?
Why do I think they're doing that? Oh, I think it's a kind of, it starts with something like pride, in the sense, like all kind of generally sinful behavior. I'm not saying it's sinful in the moral sense, but it's sinful in the general sense of missing the mark of what something is supposed to be. And so it usually starts with pride. So it's like, you know, art for art's sake. You know, we're going to make paintings for painterly paintings. We're going to make, you know, extremely refined music that is musically musical, right? That is about music. And so it starts with pride and ends up with, and then just like any sin, it falls into chaos and into idiosyncrasy and into, you know, so for example, like one of the things that happens now is that because art has become so fetishized and so idiosyncratic, that now the only thing left is something like shock value. Yeah. So we have to create shock value in order to get attention. So artists are spiraling out of control into irony and shock and surprise, you know, and to create that. People have confused the impression of beauty with the perception of the new, with the shock of the new. So they think when they see something new and something surprising, that that's an experience of the beautiful. And so it's all of that kind of coming together. And it has to do with consumer culture as well. It has to do with just a general idea that we will find our fulfillment in the satisfaction of our idiosyncratic desires. So it's not just about art, it's a general cultural movement, but art then reflects that in the most, like it reflects it in the most immediate way, because that art compresses experience. That's what art does. So you can, if you look at contemporary art, you can actually find both its fetishization, that is both the uselessness of its objects, that the objects are useless objects, commodities of exchange that people speculate on the art market, and also the subject and what they look like, which is irony and jokes and little punchlines, or something which is so idiosyncratic that nobody understands. Everybody just looks at it and pretends to have insight into what's going on, but it's just so wrapped up in the artist's own little idiosyncratic language that you don't have access to it. So it's all of these. It really is like taking the pulse of our culture, if you want to.
Yeah, it's like, so I think I feel like a lot of the problems, so I'm in education, I feel like a lot of the problems and the questions I encounter are to do with a loss of this idea of telos, a loss of an end point. And in the art, it's just an immediate thing, like an immediate sensation, as you say. And the telos is that's what participation. So participation is a good way, an easier or more practical way to say that something has lost its purpose. Because when you say something has lost its telos, people kind of look at you and blankly. But if you say you don't participate, it doesn't participate in the world properly, then they kind of understand what it is you're meaning. But it's the same point. So the art object has lost its grounded purpose, And so some people have tried to regain it. If you read Heidegger's Question Concerning Technology, he tries to regain the ancient idea of art. He talks about art as a revelation. And so when the artist gathers together things, what he's doing is also revealing. It's like a revelation of the purpose. So if an artist makes a chair, then he's actually revealing the chairness of the chair. He's revealing this purpose in the world. So he's actually kind of co-creating as he's making things. So that is what we kind of have to recover, I think. Yeah, I find that it's in discussions with some of the young people I talk to, and I'll say it's in the nature of something. It's in the nature of a chair to be sat on. It's in the nature of a cat to be a lap animal. You don't sit on a cat, and you don't mow your lawn with your toaster. And so because of it's in the nature of, you can then see what its end is, because you can labor all day trying to mow your lawn with your toaster, but after a while you have to come up against the fact that you can't do it because it wasn't designed that way.
No, exactly. And I think your insights are perfect, because that is also, I think that's the cultural moment in which we're in, which is that until recently, until maybe about 10 years ago, it felt like people were incapable of perceiving telos, were incapable of, and had this idea that everything was just either just existed or that ultimate purposes were almost superstitious. But now, as we understand the importance of consciousness in the way the world lays itself out to us, we realize that without consciousness, there's nothing really. There's no object. There's just quantum flux or whatever. And so now that we know that, we're actually coming back to something like ancient teleology, right? We're coming back to final causes, and we can argue for them in a manner that people can understand again. And so it's a great opening for religious thought right now.
Yeah, it's a great space, maybe provided in part by those horsemen of the apocalypse, so to speak, those new atheists who were so good when they came along and they were like just trashing the Christians. And so now I think as a response to that, the Christians are like, come on, we got to step up our game a bit.
Yeah, but they also, in a way, did us a great service, which is that they kind of handed us a very, very stupid Christianity on a platter and said, this is Christianity. And so it's not like that the version of Christianity they described doesn't exist. It does exist. Yeah. But the idea that that's Christianity, it's wonderful for us, because you can just go back into the great church fathers, the great, church theologians, and just demonstrate that, no, that's not what Christianity is. And actually Christianity, a lot of the theologians offer wonderful solutions to some of the problems that you're dealing with, like emergence and, the relationship between identities and their constituents. All of these things are dealt with in our great theological tradition. So
yeah, exactly. You mentioned consciousness. I was re-listening to an interview that Jordan Peterson did over here in the UK for Radio 4. It was called Start the Week, and he was being interviewed by someone, and also alongside him was a feminist author who'd just rewritten The Little Mermaid from a feminist point of view, and then some other guy who was an African, barrister who telling his story. Well, anyway, so Jordan Peterson was talking about consciousness as masculine, and they you could just hear, it was painful to listen to, because they were talking, they weren't on the same page, they were just talking almost a different language. So they kept saying, who are you to say that it's masculine? And of course you say it's masculine because you're a man, and so what you've done is you've said consciousness seems a bit like us, let's call it masculine. And I just thought that this is something I also encounter, is this inability to be able to understand that masculine and feminine symbolically isn't the same as saying male and female biologically. But I just come up against that all the time. And just recently in our school, we have put together a working party for looking at how we can help boys, because like it's a national problem, I think it's an international problem, that boys are underachieving across the board, that there's low attainment and poor behavior. And so we get this working party together and we say, so what's the solution? And we sit down, and again, it's painful. They say, well, listen, the problem is boys need to be more like girls because girls are succeeding. And so what boys need to do is maybe open up a bit more emotionally. And literally they were saying, how can we make them cry? Is there any videos we can show them in English or in drama that will help them to cry? And when they cry, we can pat them on the back and say, well done, you've opened up emotionally. And I just thought, oh my gosh, it's so, and stuff about how a mother holds her boy differently, and we have to correct all these things that have gone wrong in their whole lives about how they've been treated. And I just thought, this is so frustrating, because you're not looking at it and saying, what is a boy? He's not a girl. So the answer isn't, let's just try and make a boy like a girl, although that is what is happening. But it's so this misunderstanding about masculinity and femininity, and how often we just find ourselves talking at cross purposes.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's funny because it's almost like it's a revenge of the former position, which was during the Enlightenment and during the age of great rationality, there was a disdain for the feminine in general. There was a sense in which the feminine, it does, like, what is it, right? And this idea that women then wanted to become like men, right? You really see that in the early kind of feminist movements. And you can understand why that happened, because there wasn't this great veneration of the Mother of God, and this idea of how powerful the role the feminine plays, was kind of set aside. And so now there's like a revenge of that, which is that it started with women wanting to be men, and now it's all about trying to make men like women. And it's just funny because it's like, maybe you're right. Maybe we should rather look at this, and it's not the idea of the certain duality in the way the world manifests itself is something which is, right, it's there in the very beginning of Genesis. It's heaven and earth, and it's there in Taoist culture, and it's there in native cultures where they have the Father Heaven and Mother Earth, and it's we can discuss the details of that, but the idea that there is, in the way the world lays itself out, a relationship between opposites that are complementary is something which is so old that I don't even see what are you trying to do? Like, are you really trying to destroy something that is basically even there in your language, right? But the fact that we use duality in the way that we enact with the world, and so I think it's a very, very deep misunderstanding. And so I like, for example, what some of the things that Jordan Peterson has been doing has been interesting in trying to show how, the masculine has a positive aspect, the masculine has a negative aspect, the feminine has a positive and a negative aspect. So you have something like, the hero and the guardian and the caregiver, the person who gives authority and gives structure, but then that also becomes tyranny if it's out of control. And we can see both, right? It's like, it's not just one, it's just both. And the same with the feminine. You have the feminine, which is nurturing and caring and giving. And then you have the feminine that holds in, that devours, that kind of sucks into itself. And so you can see that we have these two categories, and it's not like everybody is just one thing. It does exist in a scale, but to try to negate the very opposition and to see that it's not important to have those complements in the world is just silly, or to try to want it, but to only want it in its opposite, because that's what seems to be what we're seeing now. It's like we want girls to be like boys, and we want boys to be like girls. So we actually do recognize the opposite.
Yeah.
We want, for every time there's like a badass hero, it's a girl, and we want in movies and in stories to have a stay-at-home dad. And that's how we're going to solve the problem, which is, let's just put it upside down, which is just completely silly. It's ridiculous. We should rather just, just rejoice in the beauty of these compliments and show the beautiful examples of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not obvious how that's any better, that you've got a man who's in the home and a woman who's kicking ass. It's like, well, you still got someone kicking someone's ass. Why is it okay that it's it just doesn't make sense.
Only okay if it's a woman, don't you?
It's okay if it's but also this lack of recognition that, as you say, we're not, it's not that we're just one thing. So one of the things as a Catholic that some people say to me, how can you accept that only men can be priests? And like you, I say, well, the fact that a man is a priest is so, it runs through all of scripture, from Israel as the bride, and all this imagery about bride and bridegroom, that it's not just this arbitrary decision made up by the Pope and his bishops, these men who hate women, and that because the man as priest who is in persona Christi therefore places us all, men and women alike, as feminine before
That's
God. Right? So
I always say
everyone
that,
in Israel,
I'm the bride of Christ, guys. I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you think that's weird, I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah, but it doesn't make you a woman.
No, exactly. It's like, it shows you how feminine and masculine scales at different levels, and there are different ways to embody it and different ways to manifest it. And that is the way that our culture is doing it, and it's completely appropriate. And so you can understand, and this is very ancient, the idea that, for example, in terms of relationship of male female, of masculine feminine, the father and the children would be relatively feminine compared to in relationship to the father, or that the man and his household, and so his servants, all these people would be considered relatively feminine compared to the masculine figure. And so this is something which is actually pretty universal. It's universal in even some of the weird kind of disturbing ways. It's just a structure of reality. Yeah.
So people refer to ships as her, and then the people in the ship are masculine in relation to the ship that's feminine, but it's got nothing to do with biology. It's just that relational. But having said that, then the woman's body is by nature created by God as a space to gestate, and then so then you've got of course then that would be the biological feminine.
Right. But it also, and you're right, but but there's a relationship between female and feminine. Yeah. That is, you are not just a feminine, or not just a female. You are a person. You are an image of God in the same way that everybody else is an image of God. But then, to the extent that you have this characteristic, then that's something which manifests itself in you. And so it is okay to say that I am. So it's okay to say something like, in Christ there is no man, no woman, no Greek, no Jew, no there's no distinction when you reach the summit, the way in which you participate in Christ. But then at the level that I exist as a man, at the level in which I'm a father, at the level in which I'm a husband, the level I am a man. And so I play that role, and the best is to embody it in the best and most powerful, beautiful, appropriate way that we can do that. And the idea that we would see the space for life, and this nurturing space, because the woman, especially, humans, women not only have the child in their body for a certain amount of time, but then they also feed the child from their body for a longer period than that. As they're even developing a relationship with the child, they'll feed the child with their own body. And I mean, that's a crazy thing. Like, the idea. So when we relate the woman to the home, it's like, that's a really hard thing to break, guys, because she was your home for 9 months, completely, and then for another year at least, let's say, as the one that is literally feeding you from her body. So these images are so deep and so profound that if we try to break them, and we are trying to break them, it will create disorder. It will create madness in us. It will create crazy things like what we're seeing right now, where it's going to create crazy things where people are trying to change their identity or to self-identify and to completely, and it's inevitable that would happen. You know, you could have predicted it 100 years ago. At the outset of the sexual revolution, you could have said, this is what it's going to lead to. And people would have said, no. But at least now we can say, well, they were right. You know, we can see where it led to. This is it, guys. You know,
that's the one little joy we can take, is we were right.
You were right.
Like everything's shit, but we were right.
That's right, at least.
Yeah, and it's so insulting to women as well, because it's like, well, hang on. So in order for me to have value, I just have to emulate a man. And there's like, how beautiful is it and wonderful that there are women who are in the home, who are nurturing their children. Let's recognize that and raise it up and say how beautiful, and say to young girls, yeah, of course you can be a CEO and a lawyer and a surgeon, but you can also be a mother and a wife, and that's a beautiful thing as well. But we're too busy
not just
telling
a beautiful
them,
thing,
yeah,
it guarantees the existence of humanity. It actually guarantees the very existence of us. And so it's like, it's not just a beautiful thing. It is something which is secretly, this is the thing about the feminine, which is so hard, I think, for people to kind of understand. It's hard to talk about because you don't want to desacralize it, but it has something to do with secret power. It has something to do with the idea. So it's difficult because the value of the feminine is in its hidden, powerful, secret influence. It's kind of like the influence of the home life, where it's not meant to be public. It's not, the glory is not meant to be public. And so it's difficult because as soon as you try to make it too public, you're almost, I always try to help people kind of hint at the secret. It's like the influence of women, the idea that women didn't have influence on society is the stupidest thing that you could say. Women have had massive influence on society. They have transformed empires. They have destroyed empires. They have done so much, but the type of influence they have was not usually the influence of the person standing up on the pedestal. Yeah. Right? It was the person standing next to that person or behind them or not seen, but who is also having massive influence. And in Christianity, you see that especially. Christianity, you see that from the time of Pontius Pilate, when his wife said, don't deal with this, be careful with this person. I had a dream, and Pontius Pilate didn't listen to his wife. But then you have other examples where Constantine's mother, you have the Cappadocian fathers, their sister, every single king, Saint Vladimir of Kiev, his mother, and the first kings the first kings in France, all the first Christian kings, there's always a woman who's Christian first, always.
Yeah,
there are even more disturbing versions of that, which is that, for example, Ulagh Khan, who destroyed Baghdad, like his favorite wife was a Christian, by the way. And so it's like there's all these secret influences that if you just take 1 second to look at history, you see these powerful women shine, but it's just that it's not the same type of power, and it's not the same type of power and glory. It's a different type of it, but it's there all through history.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it also the case of Mary opening up the space for Jesus at the wedding at Cana?
Exactly. That is the type of it. That's the type of all of it. That story, if you can enter into the secret of that story, it is mind-blowing because it really has to do with exactly what you said. It has to do with opening the space. And sometimes I say, the feminine appears as a question. That's the way to kind of understand it. It's a ambiguous space or a question that asks, but people don't understand that the question frames the answer. You don't answer something outside of the question. And so this is the power of prayer, for example. It's the power of the church as this body that is asking God to fill it. And it's the power, and you see it in the secret power that the Mother of God has in that relationship with Christ. She says, and it's crazy because you would see the story, you see it. It's like she comes to Christ and she says, here's a problem. And she said, are you going to, so he can answer yes or no, I'm going to solve the problem or not. But she's framed the reality for him. And his answer is basically, I'm not ready to die yet, which if you think about it, it's an insane answer to her question. But if you understand the stakes, you see that she's opening the way to him. She's saying, here's the door. Now, are you going to take it? And now he has to answer yes or no. But she's presenting the door to him. So if you understand that, it's very, very powerful. It can help you understand many things about the mystery of the feminine.
Yeah, well, thanks to you and the work that you're doing, I think more and more people are understanding that. And it's so important. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a young lad. He's only 21, and he's a member of Opus Dei. You may be familiar with Opus Dei as a Catholic prelate. And he's 21 now, and he decided at 14 to be a numerary. And this is a celibate member of Opus Dei. And so he's a young man, but he's talking about how he will never have children and grandchildren and so on. And he's a lovely lad. Like, he's a really nice young man, more than nice. Like, he's got a sort of holiness about him, and he loves Jesus. But after that, a couple of people said to me, I think that's terrible. You know, how can a 14-year-old boy make that decision? And I mean, we could discuss that, you know, but that's not the point. The point is, these are sometimes the same people who are saying that we should allow young people to transition. Yeah, right. So I think, so really what I wanted to then get into with you a little bit is this idea that when it comes to religion, it's how the same people can see a problem if it's religious, but the same kind of thing that they're criticizing, if it comes out of the secular, they're like, well, this is fine. Sure, we can give a 10-year-old puberty blockers, but a 14-year-old can't decide after praying and having a relationship with God that he may want to go down this path.
Yeah, and even the idea that, like, our ancestors, like the idea that, you know, a 16-year-old could marry. It's like, oh, that's crazy. Like, it's crazy that a 16-year-old could marry. Okay, so a girl can sleep with her boyfriend when she's 13, and that's totally fine. Or someone like a boy can take puberty blockers to an extent that he will be disfigured permanently for life, and he'll be biologically scarred. That's fine, right? But the ancient idea that, for the exact, like that someone could join a monastery when they were a minor, or that someone could get married, oh, that's crazy. That's a crazy, insane thing. And it's so funny because even the idea of becoming, let's say, a celibate in an order and deciding that very young, that can change. Like, that actually could change. That is, it would be breaking his vows, but it could, like, it's happened in the past. So it's actually not permanent compared to the crazy permanent things that people are doing now in the gender sphere. Even marriage, like, I mean, marriage, it's a scandal if it ends, but it's not an actual permanent physical thing the way that people are trying to do it to young people today. So it's actually worse. It's like worse in the sense that it's actually what they're accepting that is being done to these children is more permanent than these ancient vows that people would have taken in order to kind of dedicate themselves to someone or to God. So yeah, it's a crazy time to be alive when you realize that.
You're a parent, I am too. And one of the things I don't know how you feel about this. I would say that my coming back to my faith and my life being transformed by Christ. I was raised a Catholic and fell away in my 20s. It's a very familiar story, and was thought Christians were stupid, and it was a load of nonsense. And then came to understand my faith better. First of all, I actually read the Gospels, which was an eye-opener, and also learned about the teachings of my own faith and met people who were authentically Catholic, and I was so impressed. There's something different about them. But I think because I'd been down in the pits, so I'd abandoned my faith, I was smoking and drinking and going out and partying and doing whatever the heck I wanted. And I think because of that, it's a bit like the prodigal son. I feel like Christ worked in that and helped transform me. And what I worry about as a parent is I feel like I'm protecting my kids so much, and I'm trying to steer them so much in a direction to maintain their faith. And they're teenagers, and they go to confession often, and they go to mass. And I wasn't doing that at that age. And like, I should be happy, but there's a bit of me that thinks, do they need to fall on their knees? I don't want them to have a relationship with Christ that is just on a treadmill. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, I think it depends. I think that it's not necessarily, will not necessarily be so. And so you have, so for example, I think that in our tradition that's why we have the two Marys, right? We have these two images of Mary. We have in the West, there's, you know, the Mother of God and Mary Magdalene, which people are saying is the deformed version of Mary Magdalene. It doesn't matter. Like in the East, we have the Mother of God and we have Mary of Egypt. It's like, it's just, you have to understand the two extremes. And so they really do represent the two extremes of what you're talking about. But it's not like one, how can I say this? One or the other is possible. And so the idea of the Mother of God, she was 12 years old, right? She goes in, lives in the temple in the Holy of Holies. She's completely dedicated to God from her young age, you know, completely pure, you know, is basically the one who is weaving the veil of the temple. So this image of like purity from the beginning, and then into all the way to her death, like this sense of dedication, complete dedication all the way through. And then you have the other image, which would be something like Mary of Egypt, who is the worst of ever. Like, she's not even a prostitute. She doesn't even ask people to pay her. She's like, you could just imagine like the very worst of all, but then ultimately, you know, through contrition and through prayer, reaches the highest, you know, and is transformed by taking communion once, basically, is completely transformed. And so I think that those two extremes in our tradition are there to show us that there are different paths, and that you shouldn't be worried that if your kids are faithful and dedicated from a young age, that it means that they haven't experienced the conversion that maybe you experienced by going away and coming back. I think there's room for both types of life, like both types of confessions, let's say, in our tradition.
Yeah, that's really lovely and helpful to me. Thank you, Jonathan. We've got a little bit of time left. I'll just ask you a last question that comes up quite a lot with people I encounter, which is, why do I need to be religious? Because I'm a good person, and in some cases better than you, you know, me. And they give charity, and they are kind and compassionate. It's difficult. It's a difficult question. And it's the same when I'm teaching about natural law, and when we go through Aquinas's primary precepts, the children are on board with, yeah, of course, it makes sense, self-preservation, education. But the one that they don't get is, why is worship God in there? So it's that same thing. What can you say to that?
I think we're in a good spot for that argument right now. We're in a good place to talk about that, because the truth is that religion isn't, first of all, about morality. It just isn't. Never been. And if you try to make it about morality, you're not going to understand anything. You're not going to understand much about it. Like, what do the sacraments have to do with morality? What does Jesus on a cross have to do with morality? What does this have to do with like being a nice person? And, you know, and so I'm not saying that there isn't an aspect of religion which deals with morality, but it's downstream from what religion is really about, which is about the very existence, the very capacity to cohere, the very capacity to not be fragmented and broken and split apart. And so the idea, why should I be religious? It's because worshiping God is what actually binds you as a person. Morality is not enough. Morality is not enough. We need the good, in the sense of not just the moral good, but the good that draws us together, draws us into unity, not just you, but all of us together. And so it has to do with attention. Attention is what binds phenomena towards one. And so the fact that we can attend to something, right? If I can attend to this cup because I see it's good. That's why I can attend to it. That's why I see it as a cup, because I can see it's good. And it's the same for everything in the world. And so that is what worship is. Worship is attending to the highest possible good, to the source of all good. And by doing that, you are actually participating in the existence of the world. That might seem like superstition for some, But if you understand it at a lower level, sometimes people can understand it. If you understand it as, if a country doesn't attend to the things that bind it together, doesn't have a common identity, a common telos, a common memory, a common something which binds it, and we don't celebrate that. We don't have moments where we celebrate the important historical moments of our history, where we celebrate the nation, the flag, the queen, the king. Like when we have these celebrations of what binds us together, then we are going to fragment. There's no other way around it. We're going to start breaking apart, and the narratives are going to start to compete. That happens within you. If you're not united, it happens in a community, it happens in the world. And so when you do that, when you worship together, you are attending to the highest good together, and you're binding your community towards that good. When you do it in yourself, you're binding all those pesky little thoughts and all those pesky little stories that you have in your mind that are competing with each other. If you're attentive, you know that you can desire two opposite things at the same time. You can have these parasitic patterns that will take over your attention. You'll become obsessed with things. You become incapable of getting rid of bad habits and all of this. And so, but the way to bind that is through attention, to attending to the highest good. It's not a magical formula. It's something which works slowly and kind of brings it together, but without it. So when we look around and we notice the fragmenting narratives, we look around and we notice that we're politically stuck in opposites that that cannot be resolved. And when we look around and we notice, all this culture war that we see, that is because we don't have a common thing to bind us anymore. And what it will do, it'll make us break apart, and it'll also create tyrannies which try to compensate for that. So you can see it happening right before our eyes. Like the mechanisms of control that are being set up for us are mechanisms that no one has ever seen in the history of the world. The crazy amount of tracking and control that is being set up, the crazy amount of control of what is possible, because but it comes from the breakdown. Like those two things are happening at the same time. So that's what worship is.
Because of the need to order, because things are becoming chaotic, you mean?
Right.
Then
you have to overcompensate.
Yeah.
Exactly. But you overcompensate with things that are not the highest, that don't end up being the highest good. So that is what worship is. So you can see it in the very structure of the church, and the way that the church is made physically. The way that the church is made has to do with that. It's like this binding of the many into the one, the binding towards attention to that invisible point in the chalice, on the altar, where the transformation occurs, where the incarnation reveals itself to us. And so that's actually the way reality works. And it's worked like that forever. Like these structures, this idea of liturgical practice is something which is universal. The idea of that temples all look alike. They have three-part structures. They have a hidden space at the top, or something which is a mystery at the height of it. That's actually how it works. And if we don't participate in that, it's going to come back. It's going to come back in weird ways, and we're going to celebrate weird things, and we're going to worship weird things. And if you want to know what a society is, look at what it's allowed to celebrate or encouraged to celebrate. And this is inevitable. If you get rid of one, you're going to get something else. You're going to get weird religions. And that's what's happening now. So whether you want to or not, you're going to end up worshiping. The question is, what are you going to worship? That's the question.
Yeah, right. It's like whack-a-mole. You suppress it here and it pops up over there.
Right.
Isn't it?
No, exactly.
True.
But it can get really dangerous and scary.
Yeah.
Because in the 20th century, we saw the examples of what the death of God, or what the rejection of God brought about, which is these little earthly gods, these little tyrants that have all the attention and all the power and all the authority, and that costs 100 million lives. So the idea that that's not going to happen again, are you crazy? Look what's going on. Like, just watch.
Yeah, right.
Everybody senses it, that we're moving towards authoritarianism. And so that's the crux of worship, really.
And you're in the heart of it in Canada.
Yeah, that's right. We're seeing it happen before our very eyes right here, where the government is taking measures of control and of authority that we've never seen, and people are just taking it for granted because they feel the breakdown and they're afraid, and so they're willing to let their government do things that we've never let the government do before. So
that poem of Yeats comes to mind, you know, the Second Coming, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Isn't it? It's like, that's it.
That's right.
That's what it feels
and
like.
Even in that poem, it's a very dark poem, because what he's suggesting is that out of that widening gyre and out of that breakdown is actually a kind of antichrist figure that rises. It's not it's actually a kind of anti-god or a fake god, you know, a very dark principality which rises out of it. And this is, I mean, we already saw it happen in the 20th century, but now we're seeing it in a crazier way, you know, with the possibilities of AI and the possibilities of control that it offers. You know, we haven't seen anything yet. Like, so I tell, it's like the only, like, it's like, go to church. That's what I tell people. Like, just go to church.
Just go to church, people. That's
because
yeah.
Because I'm not sure you want to end up worshiping like some weird AI god, which is going to reveal itself to us pretty soon.
No, this is true. Well, listen, Jonathan, thank you so much, not just for today, but for all the work you do. You know, it's just so important, and your conversations are really powerful. And I'll continue to pray for what you're doing, and ask for your prayers for what the little I'm doing, please.
No, it was great to meet you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
You're very welcome. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.